Well, good morning. Thank y'all for being here and thank you for having us. We are very excited to be here. I know I got to present last year via Zoom, so it's always much better to be in person. And this is so hard. I'm a wanderer, but I'm trying to stay out of the view of the screen, so I'm gonna use this aisle to wander back and forth. But my name is Andrea Webb. I am a behavior consultant at Region 10. But before that, my training is as an LSSP or a school psychologist, and I did that for 18 years in the public schools before I came over to Region 10 about 2 years ago.
All right, and I am Shelly Ratcliffe. I am an occupational therapist. And at Region 10, I am an instructional and assistive technology specialist. And I've been in the schools for 18, 19 years. Home health as well, pediatrics, and been at Region 10 1.5 years.
So you'll have a printout, and I know Sarah said that some of them have changed because we tinker until the very last minute. But we will certainly, if you either leave your email address with Sarah or you want to leave it with us, we certainly are happy to share these slides with you. There's nothing secret about them. And if you just want to click on. So you'll have all of this information. You'll have our email address. I think we have our phone numbers at the end of the presentation. Email is always the easiest way to get in touch with us because we're just rarely in our offices. So tell me your name, ma'am.
Yeah. Carolyn.
Carolyn. So Carolyn had eagle eyes, and so if you go on to the next slide, we always talk or share some useless information about us. The reason we do that is because regardless of what the content is, the connection is really what's important. And that's true for you with your children's teachers and school professionals, and with us with you, right? The content will come, but so we always share useless information. Shelly and I lead very different lives outside of Region 10. She has a beautiful, lovely family, and I love Jordan Knight. Carolyn knew who Jordan Knight was. Does anybody else know who Jordan Knight is? Oh, breaks my heart.
What?
That should be your homework, is to Google New Kids on the Block.
Oh, yeah.
And you're welcome. You can spend hours on YouTube watching old video clips of New Kids on the Block. And so, my friends and I, we go to New Kids on the Block concerts every single year when they come to Dallas. We get closer and closer and closer every single year. Pretty soon we're going to be on stage, whether they like it or not. I'm sure they're going to love it. And Shelly, do you want to talk a little bit about your family?
Sure. So my family, husband, 2 kids, went to the state fair. It's my husband's 50th birthday. It was a big year at the state fair, and I love the beach. So that's my peace and calm to the crazy.
Yeah. And so really what that, right, the teachers and the staff you work with and us, we have regular normal lives and we do normal regular things. But what we all have in common is that we love kids and we care for kids and we want kids to be successful. And so what we're going to talk about today, we're not going to solve the world's problems in an hour, unfortunately, but we're going to kind of just give you some broad tips about picky eaters. And so what we're going to talk about first is really distinguishing between what is a problem feeder, sort of something that's diagnosed, and what's a picky eater. We're going to talk about some tips and some strategies that can be used both during mealtime and outside of mealtime. We're going to talk about some influencing factors, so what could impact or cause a child to be a picky eater. And then we'll end with some resources, and we've got some clickable links, so again, if you want those links, we certainly can share these slides with you. So a couple of important things to talk about first. Neither Shelly nor I are doctors. So if you have any specific concerns about your child's nutritional intake, we certainly encourage you to communicate with your child's doctor or pediatrician. But really what we're going to be talking about are general tips and ideas. And so maybe these are things that you have heard or that you have tried. And we're just going to sort of hopefully expand on that. Maybe there are tips that you have that aren't up here that you want to share. Please do that. That's why we're all here, is to learn from each other. So let's talk about this. I don't know if y'all can see this very well, but does this kiddo look familiar? Maybe this kiddo has been at your table. He has a plate of broccoli and carrots, it looks like, and his face is saying, no thank you, right?
And like my kid would say, is that chicken on a bone?
Yeah,
Like, is there bones?
right, so if it's not
On the
presented
nuggets?
in a very specific way, right, we're gonna get questions about food, right? And so maybe this is something that you have dealt with. So let's talk about what a problem feeder is and some of the characteristics that if your child is exhibiting these characteristics, you certainly want to communicate with your pediatrician. So kids who have problems with eating are going to have difficulty breathing when they're eating or drinking, right? So their gag reflex is very weak, they're gonna choke, their eyes will water when they're trying to swallow. You might see tantrums or meltdowns when presented with new food. So I often talk about, hey, presenting a new food is like a 2 on the problem scale, but we have a 10 reaction, right? They're not in sync. When we get to talking about picky eaters, what we'll see is a kid may not like a food on their plate, but they're not going to melt down. So many years ago when I worked in a school district down the road, I walked into the school building and I hear a kid screaming, just screaming as I thought he was being hurt. He didn't like green food. Not just didn't like green food, could not tolerate to see green food. So what the school had been doing and what his family had been doing is not introducing or showing any types of green food. They had green grapes on the cafeteria line and he melted down, right? That's a problem feeder, not I'm a picky eater. Problem feeders are gonna have difficulty chewing and swallowing food. A variety of different textures of food, whether it's pureed or soft, hard, crunchy, they're gonna have difficulty with chewing and swallowing. This is a pretty big key here. Problem feeders generally have a very restricted diet. So less than 20 foods are sort of in their repertoire. Anything less than 20 foods, you certainly want to communicate with your doctor, particularly as they get older, because really by the time they're 2 or 3, we should have 20, 30 plus foods. You'll see refusal of categories of foods. That could be based on texture, right? So I don't like soft, I don't like crunchy, I don't like chunky, or basic food groups. So they just won't eat a whole variety. They won't eat protein, they won't eat vegetables, etc. Your problem feeders are generally your kiddos who you see aren't eating the same meal that your whole family is eating. Oftentimes they're eating something completely separate and they're eating at a different time. So if you sit down as a family together, a problem feeder is up and up, moving, not sitting down at the table. They're almost a grazer, right? Because you're trying to get food into them at any point of the day. And then excessive drool. Again, that kind of goes back to chewing and swallowing and gagging, all of those oral motor difficulties. And then we have picky eaters. So remember, our problem feeders have less than 20 foods in their repertoire. Picky eaters will eat a variety of foods, but it's limited. They'll have at least 20 to 30 foods that they will eat in their repertoire. Picky eaters might lose interest in a certain type of food for a while. So for example, I eat peanut butter every single day. I get tired of peanut butter. I refuse to eat peanut butter, but I can introduce it back into my diet and it's okay, and we'll accept it later. All of the major food groups can be eaten, right? So one texture, they'll eat different textures and those major categories of food. Remember I talked about having meltdowns. Kiddos who are picky eaters, they will tolerate new food on a plate if they've never seen it. For example, cauliflower. They might not eat it, but they will tolerate it on their plate and not have a meltdown. And then the key point here is that although your child may be a picky eater, they are getting enough calories in their day and all of the nutrients that they need.
Like they only like McDonald's chicken nuggets versus the Chick-fil-A nuggets.
Yeah.
Or,
All right, so let's talk about just some general tips. And these certainly are not an exhaustive list of tips, but things that we can do when we're not at mealtime. So we want to teach our kids that food is safe and it can be fun. And so we want to encourage and model messy play. So you can do messy play with non-food items like shaving cream or putty, finger paint, but you can also do messy play with food items, yogurt, whipped cream, pudding, those types of things. So oftentimes teachers will do that with children as well. They'll do academic tasks with food and non-food items. So you certainly can do that if they're practicing their name, their math, whatever. And oftentimes a kid will look at you and think, why are we playing with whipped cream? What is happening here? But if we get our kiddos interacting and touching foods maybe that they don't have a lot of interaction with, then we're teaching them that food is safe and it's okay.
And they might taste it instead of going and washing their hands. They're like, oh, that's not so bad. That is sweet, but it looks like, shaving cream, but it's whipped cream.
Yeah. And so sometimes, for example, we certainly don't ever want to lie to our kids and say, for example, if we're giving them a fish stick, telling them that it's chicken, right? We don't want to lie to our kids, but we don't have to say exactly what it is. So if I have a kiddo who says, I hate ketchup, I absolutely refuse to eat ketchup, I don't have to call it ketchup. I can call it red food glue. Hey, let's use red food glue. We want to use red food glue or yellow food glue, which could be mustard. Because like Shelly was saying, right, if we accidentally taste it, touch it to our face somehow, then we can start introducing those foods. We certainly don't want to force food on our kiddos.
Because they may be associating red marinara sauce to ketchup. Well, when they taste ketchup, they're like, oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
It's better, and it is more like a dip.
And although we may identify our children as picky eaters, or when we're communicating with school staff, maybe during an evaluation or with our pediatrician, we want to make sure that we're not labeling our child everywhere else as a picky eater. So when we go to our family for Thanksgiving, we'll say, oh, she won't eat that, she's a picky eater, right? That would just be like saying, oh, this is my child, they have Down syndrome, or this is my child, they have whatever, right? We don't need to use that label. We can just say, we're gonna try a variety of foods. They may or may not eat them. Another tip that we could try, or that has been beneficial, is having your child be involved in food purchasing and food prep, right? All of our kids, regardless of their developmental stage, are trying to exercise independence. And so when we go to the grocery store, having our kids pick out a new vegetable or fruit, going through kid-friendly cookbooks with our kiddos and having them pick out a recipe to try together. So having your child help bake, prepare, prep, and all of the things that are associated with eating food, they can do, even if they don't try a new food. So measuring, pouring, sifting, like brushing on any kind of oil on top of bread or whatever. All of that can be done. There doesn't have to be an expectation of trying anything. But again, when we're involving our students in the process of all of these items can come together to make something, then our students or our kids are more likely to try, right? If they have some control over it, they're more likely to try something new. That goes beyond food, right? That goes with anything that we want them to try new.
I know one of my favorites is Brussels sprouts, right? Favorite stories, I guess. I do love Brussels sprouts now, but growing up, awful. Smell, awful. Cabbage, awful. All of it. And then, people were talking about, oh, they're roasting Brussels sprouts. And I'm like, I didn't say this. I was like, maybe I need to try it. But I knew my kids would eat it, right? And so it's green, it's new, looks different. And so we went to the grocery store and they had the Brussels sprouts still on the, stalk. I was like, oh, that's different. And so I just made this big deal. I was like, look, there are Brussels sprouts on the stalk. And so we went home, we cut it off, and because I told the kids, I was like, I always said I did not like Brussels sprouts because I didn't like the smell, but honestly, I had never tasted them either. Because I think they were steamed and it just sounded awful. But so we went home, we cut it off the stalk, we cut them in half, and the kids knew that Mommy's trying this too, and Daddy hadn't had Brussels sprouts either. And I was like, we're all just gonna try it. We're all gonna try it, and we're just gonna see, and we'll have some little tips later on, what to ask. But it's like, oh, that's not so bad with salt and pepper and some Parmesan cheese and olive oil. So it was a whole new experience outside of mealtime, going to the grocery store and seeing foods that weren't in a bag and they looked different, and because they were kind of,
So
go
along-
through phases.
Yeah. Along with even going to a grocery store, something like visiting a farmer's market, right, as a family activity, where there's all types of different things that they can experience, whether that's food, non-food items, etc. And we'll talk more about this later, but right, it can take up to 10 to 20 tries of a new food before a child will accept that food, right? So we might say, oh, I tried to give my child a Brussels sprouts and they hated it. Okay, well, it may take more than just one attempt, right? And that's why those child-friendly cookbooks are great, because they have multiple different types of recipes, because it's okay to be like, oh, that one didn't work out, let's pick another one.
And now they sort of like Brussels sprouts, but we all definitely know when sometimes they're a little roasted too much, sometimes they're a little more soggy because they have too much olive oil. So it's just a conversation and we just talk about it. Mommy didn't do so good. Well, now my kids are my 10-year-old he loves to help in the kitchen, and he's like, yeah, too much olive oil is kind of soggy, but they still taste it. So it's just, letting them open up about how they feel about it and the change, because it's not always going to be the same unless you go to a restaurant.
So let's talk about some things that we can do during mealtime. One, we always want to create a safe environment for our kids during meals. We don't want to ever force feed our kids, make them try something, right? Coercion for anything doesn't work. So saying, take one more bite, you must eat 10. And I heard that growing up too, right? Like we had to eat the number of peas that were our age. But what happens is that then we start to negatively associate food, right? If I either force my child to eat something, or I try to bribe them to eat something, or I punish them for not eating something, now we've negatively associated that with that food item. So regardless of whether they would have loved that food or not, they have that negative association with it, and they're not gonna, or they're gonna resist it more.
Or they expect it. Like, okay, I took 2 bites, so I'm gonna expect a sweet dessert or something, instead of just having it part of the meal, like a cookie or a part of a cookie. Each time they expect that as part of their meal time, versus, oh, if you eat this, then you get the cookie. Well, then it's like, well, if you eat this non-healthy or non-preferred, just call them non-preferred, then you get the preferred. So then it's like, oh, this is not preferred.
And just like when we're trying to change any behavior, we set up the environment, right? We only control ourselves. So we make the food, we offer the food, our child chooses to eat the food or not. And so we want to set up those expectations. So having a safe plate or a no thank you plate, we have some pictures of, kind of what a plate could look like. A no thank you plate is, right, I've introduced new foods, but there's a plate to the side so that if my child is like, I'm not gonna eat that today, I just put it on that plate, right? That helps me recognize, okay, is it a texture, is it a color, right? Maybe I can introduce something different than next time.
And it's not touching.
Yeah.
Right? It can't touch.
Yeah. And then as Shelly said, we wanna avoid using sweets and non-healthy foods as reinforcers, right? So we always say, well, if you eat your dinner, you get dessert, right? And so it's like this thing that they have to endure to get to something that they like, right? We don't want those things to be contingent upon one another. Now that doesn't mean that if they don't eat anything that you should give them all the cookies and all the sweets and all the things that they love. But maybe if they get 2 cookies, normally you only give them half a cookie, right? So we just don't want, again, to pair something that feels negative with something that feels positive, because then I have to endure this to get to that thing that I enjoy. Limiting distractions. So this is difficult, and it was difficult when I was growing up, it's difficult today, but you want to eat as a family as often as you can, because what that tells us, your child, is that mealtime is important, It's important as a family, we can have conversations. So again, it's pairing a positive, right, family time with food, which may not feel so positive all the time. We wanna make sure that our screens are put away. Our kids' screens are put away, and our screens are put away, for a couple of reasons. One, when we are distracted with technology, we're not tasting the food, right? So if we're introducing a new food to our child, they're not really necessarily registering that food because they're wrapped up in their technology. It also makes it difficult for a child to recognize when they're satiated, right? I'm just eating because I'm mindlessly eating, right? And so if I'm a parent and my kid will only eat mashed potatoes and I want them to eat, I'm just putting mashed potatoes on the plate and they're just mindlessly eating because they're watching videos, right? They're not getting the nutritional intake that they need. So we want our kiddos to start recognizing their signs in their body. I'm full, I've had enough, etc.
And a lot of times, I mean, this is pretty prevalent. I mean, especially whenever I was working home health, that's what parents would say. It's like, oh, they eat great as long as the TV's on, or they're watching the videos, which they just wanted them to eat. But like Andrea said, it just puts a whole different, picture of mealtime and what that should look like. They're not looking at their food; they're just eating, and they aren't aware of what's happening in the textures. Because then you can talk about it. Oh, you just took a bite of something crunchy, which you always eat soft. So it's just something to be aware of.
And oftentimes, parents, when I would go into the home, they would say, well, this is the only way I can get my child to the table.
Right.
And so, again, I'm all for reinforcement. Reinforcement and bribery, there's like a real fine line between them, right? I reinforce when a student or my child has done something that I want them to do. Bribery says, I will give you whatever you want to do this thing. So we want to make sure that we can reinforce behavior, but we don't want to bribe kids to eat food. And then other distractions, like, so if you have a bunch of pets or that are running around, right? One, we're dropping food, right?
There goes the peas.
We don't like it.
Oh, they ate all their peas.
But also, if you have a child who's highly distractible, any of those distractions are going to keep them from trying new food, eating new food, and so we just want to limit those distractions. We want to make sure that we're talking about food in a positive way. So that kind of goes back to eating meals as a family, making mealtime a social experience. Not only talking about our day, but also talking about the food that's on the plate, right? Particularly if you're introducing new foods. And when we show you some pictures later, there's some different types of placemats that can be used so that there's some questions, things like that. We don't want to be on our phone or watching television. We want to be modeling good behavior, good eating behavior for our kids. And then engaging with your child about the food that they're eating. We'll talk about rating food, giving it stars or hearts and what they like, what they don't like, because that gives us an idea. So for example, if I introduce mashed sweet potatoes to my kid and I see that they like it, I can use that as a food bridge and say, oh, okay, I can introduce something that's similar color, similar texture. I can use that to engage my child and build their food palette. In terms of the chair and the place setting, you want to make sure that your kids' feet are touching the ground, or that they have something stable when they're sitting at their table. You really want to be sitting at a 90-degree angle when they're eating. When our feet dangle, that throws off our vestibular system and it can be disorienting. And so, right, if I'm trying to regulate my sensory system, my balance, I'm not interested in trying to eat food. It could cause me to feel nauseous, all kinds of things. So if your child's feet are on the ground, they feel more stable.
And if you try to eat and swallow and do new things without your feet being planted, it's a little tricky.
And then do you mind, Sarah, clicking on that link, that plate design? So this is just an article. We're talking about, this is about preschool students, but it really goes towards really any developmental age. And it's really talking about,
Sorry. I was like, I didn't think it had sound.
oh, did that sound?
No, I think it was.
It really is talking about how we portion our plate and what we put on our plate. So this is not just us talking, this is science, right? They've done a lot of research about how we place things on a plate and the types of plates that we're using.
And the results of this, and we can get you the link, but when I found this article, I was like, oh, like there's research that segmented plates with pictures were associated with significant increases in both the amount of vegetables taken and the amount of vegetables consumed per child each day. And this was for preschool. So I just thought that was interesting. I mean, because when you think about it, you think of, you know, when you're little, you have the, you know, lunch trays, you have the segmented plates, and then we kind of get away from it.
Oops, sorry.
So that was an article on plate design. It could affect how much.
Yeah. And then we want our meal times to be structured, our meal times and our snack times. We want our kiddos to know that there is an end time to meals and snacks, because we don't want kiddos grazing for long periods of time. And so using a visual timer to say, all right, dinner ends at 7:30 or dinner ends at 6:30. Again, we're talking about a child who's a picky eater, so they're getting their nutritional intake throughout the day. So if they don't eat everything at dinner because you don't let them sit there for 2 hours, it'll be okay, right? That nutritional intake will be okay. And then having just a daily routine for snacks and meal times. So that could be, again, meal prep. Like, what are we having for dinner tonight? Let's get all the ingredients out on the counter so that they're ready. What are we having for our snack? That could be a visual, right? So if I have a variety of snacks, my child can pick which snack they're gonna have that day. So we just wanna have a routine, just like you have a routine for bath time, bedtime, homework, all of that. You wanna create a routine around your meals. It should be structured.
Is mine?
I don't know.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm gonna move over here so I can see the slides.
Sorry.
You know, just, I found this graphic and I thought it was pretty perfect because we talked about the no thank you bowl, no thank you plate. But sometimes we just need to step back and simplify, get back to the basics, because whenever they were young, we started with simple foods. And then we gradually started to increase different food choices and different textures. So this graphic and it's an Instagram, Snacks with Jax, so it's already in the picture as a resource, and she had some good tips. But start small, you know, you don't want to overload the peas and carrots, and then you put, because a lot of times that's what we do, because we want them to try it, so we want it to look good, and then their favorite part of the meal is the bread, right? So maybe cut the bread in half and then just place just a few pieces on there. Add a familiar dipping sauce. I know there's lots, I get lots of parents that say, oh, my child will only eat McDonald's chicken nuggets, right? So a lot of times I'll just say pair it with, so if they like the McDonald's ketchup, the McDonald's barbecue sauce, get a bunch of those. And they can dip whatever they want in that McDonald's barbecue sauce. And you might be surprised what they will eat with that. And then the novelty or the new item, just put it closest to them so that it's in their vision. They may not touch it, they may not eat it, but it's there. And I love how they put a mushroom, because that's usually the, right? And then familiar foods like the bread, and then a no thank you bowl, because it's, you know, off to the side, but that is an option for them that they can. I tried it, but I'm gonna put it in a special place.
So this is considered a safe plate,
Right.
because it has foods that are familiar to our child, right? We're not gonna put only new or unfamiliar foods on the plate, right? So it's safe, they recognize the things that they like and know, but then as Shelly was saying, putting that new item closest to them.
Instead of like further away,
Yeah.
which I hadn't really thought of that, but I was like, oh, that's good. So then the divided and undivided plates, so we kind of talked about the divided plates, and I told Andrea, I was like, yeah, I just like probably 6 months ago, my kids are 13 and 10, just got rid of the divided plates. You know, the Thomas the Train and the, you know, the princess ones, you know, with the special silverware, because that's where we started. And sometimes we need to go back there because they don't want that food to touch. They don't want the, you know, juices from the green beans to run into their bread, right? So just, you know, being aware of that, and same with, I mean, because I know I was like that, and I know there are lots of adults that are like that as well, like holidays, they have the divided platter, Chinette dishes, right? So I'm not a fan of putting my desserts on my plate with my savory foods. I go back for dessert. So just have that in mind. And so the divided plate, it's easier for learning to scoop. It helps adults visualize the balance as well as the kids. It prevents foods from touching. The undivided, so it's, you know, you're transitioning, so it allows the foods to touch. It's more common outside the home, so you definitely want to transition because you go to a restaurant and things, they may or may not have the divided plate. And sometimes it is more challenging to scoop foods that spread out. So that's why a lot of times we start with the divided plates when they're young.
And it's great because if you have a child who has some motor difficulties, it helps them to be able to practice those fine motor skills of scooping and stabbing with the fork.
Kind
or,
of gives them a wall
yeah.
to help. And then variety is the spice of life. I thought this was a great visual, that we're probably more apt to try more things with the more foods on our plates. It doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be 7. I mean, I don't know the last time I offered 7 different choices. And sometimes it's just, you know, canned green beans, canned corn, and just kind of mix it up. So it's just something just to kind of have in the back of your mind that they find that children are more attracted to plates that are full of color. And so I know that's one thing we talk about at home is like, you know, we have a picture of the food pyramid. It's just like, let's try to, you know, have a colorful plate. And so that way they may not eat the colored foods all the time, but they may tell you, they say, oh, it's a colorful plate.
And part of that is being able to see all of it. So you may not want to get your finest china out and put all those foods on there, but something that you can try are clear dishes, right? So that your child can see everything that's in the dish. And then you can offer a sort of a forced choice so that they have to put it on their plate. They may not have to try it. So for example, if I want my child to eat mashed potatoes, I mean, who doesn't love mashed potatoes? But if your child doesn't love mashed potatoes, right? I can put a big spoon in there and a little spoon in there. And I can say, are you gonna use the big spoon or the little spoon to put mashed potatoes on your plate? So it's not, hey, do you want mashed potatoes? It's which one, how much are you gonna put on your plate? And you might even be able to take a step back from that and say, maybe I serve mommy, maybe I serve daddy, because I'm not putting mashed potatoes on my plate today. So again, it's just about that interacting with the food. And of course, just like us, right? If I went into a restaurant that I wasn't real sure about, I would be like, where's this food coming from? What does it look like, right? That's our kids, right? If they are a picky eater, if they're having some food difficulties, they wanna be able to see the food that they're being offered. They love you, but if it's coming out of the kitchen, they're like, where did this food come from? Helping them to see it is gonna give them more of an opportunity to at least interact with it.
And we've all been to restaurants where we weren't sure what the food was gonna look like when we ordered it. You know, we look at others, we're like, oh, that looks good, what is that? So it's just things to be aware of, but yeah, those are good tips.
I was just gonna ask a question. Does smell play a factor in that? Like smelling something, maybe they're more likely to try it if it smells good, or they like the smell of just having the food available, or no?
Yeah, of course. So smell and taste, those two senses go together, right? What do we normally do before we put something in our mouth? We smell it. So if something doesn't have a pleasant odor, your child is certainly less likely to try something. And so that kind of is that food bridge as well, right? I can use color, texture, all of that, but I can also use smell. Things that smell similar, I can add that as my food bridge to trying new foods. That's a great point.
Yeah, I won't forget. I making a new recipe that was recommended, and the kids walk in, they're like, what is that smell? Of course, I didn't smell it, because I've been smelling it for, 45 minutes or whatever. And I was like, I don't know, I don't know what that smell would be. And sure enough, they were not a fan, which they loved everything in it, but it's just the fact that it did not smell good when they walked in the door. So it's definitely related to how it smells. And I know, like, in college, I'll never forget, like, when cafeteria smells. Like, even my daughter, she was like, I'm just not hungry at lunch because the cafeteria just has a smell. So we tried some different things, like coffee beans at her lunch so she could smell that instead. So there's different things, and a lot of times, if you just talk to them, like, why aren't you eating lunch? Why? So those are all good tips. So these are just some visuals that we found that are strategies. The first then, like we said, try not to pair like first broccoli, then ice cream, but maybe a non-preferred, and then maybe the bread or something. So if they need those visuals, the one-to-one visuals, that may be helpful. Some rating scales, foods I tried, and what was your rating? Like 3 stars, 1 star. Oh, that was really good. And it also helps your memory, because I know there's some things like I make and it's like, oh, that was delicious, but next month I may not remember what that was. And the placemat, sometimes that's helpful. Have them set the table, the plate, the cup, the utensils. And sometimes there are placemats that kind of have pictures of different colorful foods and things like that will help guide. The kids food critic activity, and this is linked, and we're happy to share those links, but it's really good from USDA, and they are able to critique the foods. So it's on, I can't really read that, but do you remember what those for? So you can draw the food, and
so it's talking about the visual appeal, the smell, the taste. So it's sort of all of these sensory things, right? So you might present a plate, and then whether they eat it or not afterward, do a family activity, right? Hey, draw what we had tonight. Okay, let's talk about it. What was new? What was the same, right? What do they like? And then you kind of score it or total it. Or you might ask them to draw what was new on your plate. And then, so you can get an idea of what they like, right? So that can be a fun family activity.
It kind of takes it away from some of the food, but kind of gives them a different view of the activity and what they're looking for.
And it gives some control, right? Because I can say, oh, you really did not like this. Okay, thank you for trying it. And then I store that in my memory. I'm not gonna put it on the plate the very next day. Now, I'm not saying I'll never put it on the plate again, but again, we want our kids to know that if they make a request, that request can be honored without them having to throw a big fit, right? That's what we're trying to avoid, is some of those behavioral excesses, because we're introducing new things to them.
And then the last one was, I'm a food scientist. I thought this was cute because, what does it look like when you feel it? What does it touch? What is the touch here? Smell and taste, and then do I like it? And these are, all kids will do these. I mean, little kids, older kids, so that way it kind of gets them in the conversation of, oh, maybe I don't like the smell, but it tastes good.
And something that I forgot to mention earlier is using sight presenting it a different way, right? Some of our kids don't like crust on their bread. What do? We cut the crust off. So we can use cookie cutters, right, to shape our food into different things, right? So maybe they don't want, right? Maybe they don't want an entire chicken breast, but if I cut it into a dinosaur shape or a star shape, they're more apt to try it, and they might be willing to use that cookie cutter shape. Again, they may not try that food, but just again, interacting with the food is that first step to trying something new.
Factors that affect eating habits, and we've kind of gone over some of these, but the child, is there a fear or anxiety around certain foods? Have they almost choked on food before, so now they're a lot more hesitant to try certain foods? The distractibility, hyperactivity when it comes to meal times and snacks.
And sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
think about us. So if you've ever gone to a restaurant or you've ever eaten something and you've gotten sick, right? You're really likely not to try that food again, right? So you've got that fear and anxiety about that food. You're like, I'm never eating that
And as
again.
soon as they say that restaurant, you're like, oh.
Right. So for whatever reason, maybe it didn't smell the way they thought it wanted it to smell. Maybe it wasn't seasoned the way they liked it. Maybe it had a sauce that they didn't like. Right now they've associated it. Now they have that fear with it. Or it could be something like, hey, I gagged, I choked because the bite was too big, or I didn't chew it well enough. And so now we're pairing that that fear with that food, and we have to break that association.
Parents. So limited to no positive reinforcement. So we just want to be careful when we do that. We want positive reinforcement when the kids are trying new foods and during mealtime. Modeling of appropriate eating behaviors. We need to model it because they are watching. I know lots of kids, parents, friends that they're like, oh, my child won't eat this and this, and you start talking to her like, well, I don't really eat that either, and we all have preferences, but we just need to watch, like certain diets that we're on, the kids are watching. Oh, mom's not eating any carbs, they're on the keto diet, so I don't want that pasta tonight. So they are watching, so just be careful what you say, and eating and restricting. So restricting child's diets, I mean, we see this a lot where they're either restricted or it's just, all the chips and I call them orange meals, where they just, have the Cheetos and the cheese, and it's all orange when you look at it. No clear limit set, fear or guilt around meal times. So we just need to be careful and be mindful of it.
And really, when we try to introduce, and you probably are well aware of this, anytime we try to introduce anything new, right, we might see big behaviors. And so then, especially when it comes to eating, because we want our kids to eat. And so then we feel guilty that they haven't eaten anything, or we're fearful because they haven't eaten their dinner. And so then we'd say, okay, well, just tonight you can have these chips, or just now you can have 3 extra cookies or whatever, because we just want them to have calorie intake. Right. And so we just want to be very careful about that. One, that we're watching our own fear and guilt, right? Our kids will be okay, but also that we're not negatively reinforcing those behaviors, right? Because if my kid sees, oh, well, if I just have a fit at dinner time and then my mom will give me chips, or my dad will take me to Chick-fil-A, okay, well, what are we gonna see every single day? Big behaviors, right?
And it becomes the expectation.
Yeah.
And the same, I lost my train of thought. It's okay, I'll come back to it. The environment, so lack of exposure to a variety of foods, lack of food availability. So kind of going back to what we talked about, just expose them to new foods, and when you go places, oh, those green beans may look different than the canned green beans that we have at home, or vice versa. So just, talk to them about it. Oh, yeah, those are green beans. You love green beans. They just might look a little different. I know when we were talking about this, my daughter, she did not like the black pepper specks in scrambled eggs or mashed potatoes or anything. And so, I mean, there was a phase. I bought white pepper because some foods without salt and pepper is just gross, right? So, I mean, we do go through phases to try to, we don't add the parsley because it's just for color. But then as they get older, we may try some new things so that they get used to eating other places, other foods. I know that usually holidays is not my daughter, she would just eat the rolls. And the mashed potatoes, they want plain mashed potatoes, plain corn, plain green beans. They don't want it mixed up in a casserole. But the more we expose them to those foods, they might try them one time and gradually build up their.
And there are some cultural differences, of course. So within some cultures, right, they have their specific foods. And so when our kids come to school and they are exposed to those different foods, if that's the first time they've ever had that exposure, we might see some of those, we might see some different reactions to that. And then in terms of food availability, I don't know how often you grocery shop, but if you notice that things that are really bad for you are so much cheaper than things that are good for you. And so, right, if you are on a fixed income, right, you may be buying things that are less nutritionally healthy for your family, for all of you, because, right, you have a limited budget, and right, you're buying for a family. So that lack of food availability is a real hindrance to some of that.
Grazing, no feeding schedule, and this, again, it's, if they're grazing on the goldfish and the Horizon vanilla milk during the day, cause that's their snack and that's what they have, and as parents, we're like, oh, they're getting their calcium, they're getting their calories, they're getting their intake. They might not be hungry for mealtime. So it's just something to, be aware of, that if they are grazing, what they are grazing on, I mean, is it, you know, the crunchy celery that isn't going to, fill their bellies, or is it the goldfish and, the milk and or chocolate milk, or, different things that they may not be, as hungry at mealtime, or, you know, space it out.
And if you're gonna, you know, if grazing is sort of a bridge, you wanna choose foods that have a high water content, right? So celery, watermelon, grapes, those things that will fill a child up, because it's full of water, not full of sugar or, you know,
The fillers.
right.
And then lack of mealtime structure. And, you know, I mean, it happens. As they get older, the activities, there's practices and things, and sometimes, I mean, my daughter will be home and she'll be working on homework because she's not really hungry because she just got home and she had a snack at dance. But my son he's going to bed earlier, and so, but we can talk about it. Like, we can all be in the same room, we can, you know, talk about our day, we can talk about what's for dinner, maybe what's new. One may not be a fan, but they're eating it because, you know, it smells good, which was the other night. It's like, it smells good, but I don't really know how to like it, so, but they ate it. So all these are just bridging to, hopefully to expand their repertoire of foods. And then what to remember. So supporting picky eaters is a gradual process. It takes 3 years to develop mature feeding skills in a neurotypically developing child. And then we cannot expect quick progress in just a short time. So a lot of times we want it to be really quick, but these small steps can help get to where you wanna go.
So, and I would say, you know, extend grace to yourself.
Yes, definitely.
Right? If you and your child both end up crying, the next day will be okay, right? Just, if you put something on the plate and it ends up on the wall, it's okay. Right? So it doesn't, just like any behavior that you're trying to change, God bless you, it didn't develop overnight, you're not gonna change it overnight. So just give yourself some grace along with your children.
Yes. And then remember, we all have food preferences. Some of us are gonna choose the burger or barbecue sandwich, some will choose a salad. Pizza, you know, when you go to order pizza, who wants deluxe with everything, and who wants plain cheese? So just remember that.
And I was just gonna note too, when you were talking about like grazing, sometimes your child might be more likely to graze on goldfish because they're the same every time. Every goldfish is gonna taste the same and look the same, versus like a grape, some are firm, some are squishy, some might be sweet, some might be tart. So that can also contribute to some of like the fear and anxiety they might have because it's unexpected. I don't know what this fruit might taste like, but I always know what this goldfish might taste like.
Yeah. And so that's why some of those visuals are great, right? Because green grapes and red grapes taste differently, even though they're all grapes. And so I can have a conversation about that. Well, did you like that one? What did it feel like? What did it sound like in your mouth when you chewed it, right? So we can start having conversations about foods and their textures and adding to that language, right? Because if I just say, I just don't like peas, right? if I have a conversation with my child about it, I can learn about what is it that you don't like. Do you not like the color? Do you not like the texture? Do you not like the taste? Right? Because then I can find other things that I can bridge that food with.
Or maybe you don't like, the canned English peas, but you like the frozen peas that are a little more crunchy, aren't so mushy.
And as we said earlier, it takes, 10 to 20 tries of a food before we can determine if we like it. If your child doesn't like we were saying, we all have food preferences. I do not like peanut butter. I know I don't like peanut butter. I'm never gonna like peanut butter, right? But I can tolerate it. I've tried it. I know that I don't like peanut butter, right? My parents don't force me to eat peanut butter, and I don't force myself to eat peanut butter. It's okay. Like your kids aren't going to eat every single thing. It's about expanding their palate and their mealtime experiences.
And the goal is to eat a variety of textures. So just explaining, you see that they love crunchy foods. So maybe trying other foods that might be crunchy and just say, you like all these other crunchy foods. Here's some other crunchy vegetables that you might like. You might like them raw versus cooked. So these are some resources that we found, and we're happy to share links. I don't think we have time to click through all of them, but we can definitely share them out.
Yeah, so it's got, I'll just talk about a couple. So help or hinder, so it really is just about some of the language that we use. So does it help or hinder to say, it'll make mommy so happy if you eat that food, or if you try that. So it just gives some helpful phrases, like how to change some of our language. Of course, you've got grocery store bingo. So if you're taking your kids to the grocery store, you can play a little game, like who can find a red apple, a green apple, whatever. Kids Eat in Color is a great website because it talks about introducing a variety of different foods by color. So if your kid loves the color blue, and being able to introduce new foods because of the color that they enjoy, and some of the different benefits that different color foods have. So
The blue foods are hard to find.
right.
Just kidding.
Well, but then you can use a variety. So if I love blueberries, I might like blackberries because right, it's purple is sort of an offshoot of blue. So
I just say that because one time I was trying to make this rainbow for a baby shower, right? And somebody was like, blue, and I was like, oh gosh, it's hard to find blue and purple vegetables.
yes. So anyway, these are we'll be happy to share these slides with you so you can kind of go through these. Some of them have some of the same tips that we talked about, but it's just there so that you can look at it at your own pace. You can pick one or two things. You never want to do all of the things at one time. Just pick one or two things to try, and then you can try something else.
And it can be very overwhelming. And so, we just want you to take something, maybe start one thing this week, or so just start small. Don't think you're gonna change all the things, but maybe you just start, just having communication and conversation, talking to your child about different things. Hey, next time we go to the grocery store, we're gonna do this. And so just maybe start small. Make it manageable. And here we are.
Questions?
There's our contact information.
Knowing that
Do you want me to stop the recording before you?
No.
Okay.
So knowing that every child is an individual, and with that disclaimer, what do we know research-wise as far as how picky eating in childhood projects to how they will be health-wise as an adult? Do we have any information about that?
Health-wise, the research does show that, they tend to be healthy, but it does show that they continue to be picky eaters into adulthood, definitely. But they just start to learn, and they, find foods that they eat that are, protein, and like the vegetarians, like they just try to find foods that fit within their diet. So health-wise,
Because they're
I think they
getting
tend
all
to
of
be
the picky eaters are getting all of the
nutritional.
nutritional intake, the calories that they need.
So
But-
it sounds to me like parenting a picky eater is about helping them on that pathway of finding what they will be able to eat in adulthood.
yes,
That will keep
and a
them
lot of times it's phases. I know when you're in it, it's tough, especially from like 2 to 5, sometimes 8. But a lot of times, as they go places, and that's, one thing we didn't talk about is like when they invite friends that do eat lots of different foods. A lot of times they'll try new foods. Like you go to someone else's house and they don't have the specific brand Oreos or whatever, that they might try something that looks a little different. So it's just exposing them to different experiences, different food items.
But what we also know, right, is that if I'm rigid in one area, right, it can bleed into other areas, right? So if I'm a very rigid eater, and because I have fear and anxiety, then that fear and anxiety can bleed into other areas of my life as I'm growing and developing. And so it's not just about expanding the palate, it's also about recognizing and understanding, do I have a fear about this? What is that fear? How do I address that fear, right? We're teaching coping skills so that past age 5, past age 10, into adult, like how can I be a successful, productive adult in the world and have coping skills?
And feeding, I mean, from the beginning, I mean, it is control. I mean, it's something that we cannot force them to do. So they tend to have control over that and they know it. So it's just trying new things and certain language that helps. And the helpful help or hinder site was good about different key phrases. And I'm like,